national call. I'm Jim Allen, and I'm delighted to be introducing our guest speaker today, Heather Smith. Like me, Heather is from Adelaide. As you're about to find out, she's optimistic, visionary, and a champion for solutions. Heather was awarded a Bachelor of Engineering, Electrical and Electronic Engineering from University of Adelaide in 1990. She's worked in various roles in the South Australian Public Service. She was Project Manager for the South Australia's 2005 Greenhouse Strategy and Principal Advisor Greenhouse and Climate Change from 2006 to 2014. She's a board member of CORENA, Citizens-Owned Renewable Energy Network Australia Incorporated, which provides capital for community solar and energy efficiency projects. She chairs the Coalition for Community Energy. So community energy is a topic today, and as a person who struggles with being a consumer with limited knowledge and power, I'm eager to learn more about how community energy can liberate and empower us as citizens. All yours, Heather.
Thanks, Jim. I hope our sound holds out because I've cracked in and out a few times, but let's get on with it. I want to talk not only about community energy, but I had the privilege of doing a Churchill Fellowship in 2016, travelling around the world, and so casting Australia's context in that more global context. And I've just started a PhD, and so it's also for me a question of how do we affect systems change, because that really is what's making climate and energy transitions difficult for us to accelerate. So this is where I went, all over the place, mostly chasing community-led change. I won't say only community energy. A lot of energy systems around the world are actually run by local government. So if that's not community energy, what is? Why do you need community energy? And some of them, the examples I went and looked at were also about communities forcing those local or regional governments to act and give them more say in how their energy systems change. And in my overall sort of view of things, I started life as an energy efficiency consultant doing industrial energy efficiency, and very much a fan of Amory Lovins and his work on soft technology. And back in the 70s, Amory was saying to America, you don't need nuclear. You don't need these, you could do the whole thing with peaceful technology. And you've got to frame this in the context of the big social movements of the late 60s. Now, he made the case for a distributed energy system, a network of smaller systems where you did as much of your energy productivity locally. And of course, when I started my career, we were doing energy efficiency in business, and it really, I guess, baffled me as to why we didn't do more of this, because it made money. And I guess that's this picture sums up the challenge that I think we're confronted with, which is, can we take a centralised system back to something that's possibly much more cost effective, much cleaner, much more connected to what people want in the places where they live. And so I just want to bring up a couple of frameworks that I am trying to think about as I explore my PhD. And the first one is to understand that in systems change, there's always a messy point in the middle where the path forward is not predetermined. And I think that's really interesting in the context of energy, because no one's going to deny that we're undergoing an energy systems transition, but we're probably at that really crumbly bit, that uncertain bit in the middle where we don't know what the future path is actually going to be determined. And the second framework that I keep reminding people about as I work is this sort of overarching, who provides in society? Is it markets? Is it government? Is it community? And markets and government have really dominated, right? You know, first it was government had all the power, then it went to markets have a lot of the power in this swing towards neoliberalism. But both markets and government rely on community to give them that social license to be. And it was really clear in my Churchill Fellowship that the physical systems that you see in America and Europe and in different European countries are different, and in Japan, they all look very similar across the globe. But the way that every country has decided to provide those systems is quite different and quite nuanced. And over the top of this, of course, sits culture. You know, when you ask, why is Denmark in the situation it's in, it's very clear that the culture that's driven their transition comes from their society as to the energy system they wanted. And this is one of the socio-technical transitions frameworks, and it just reinforces what I was saying, that, you know, it frames everything as a regime. The energy regime is very solid, very stable, but it gets disrupted by the niches and where the innovation happens in the niches. And as the niche changes the regime from an old one into a new one, that's where you get this messy bit in the middle where the path forward isn't predetermined, if you like. So that brings us to community energy, that sort of background. Australia has a lot of community energy groups. They've all sprung up in the last 5 years or so, so it's really quite a recent conversation nationally. A lot of the groups haven't built their first project, and that shouldn't necessarily be the definition, but some groups, some models have been very successful and have built multiple projects. And so I'm going to go through some of those models today, but I'm also going to say at the outset, community energy is like a bunch of startups. You know, everyone's designing and thinking about this from scratch. And there's a lovely analogy that Clay Shirky gives when he describes why open source software and Wikipedia and sort of collective infrastructure like that, a collectively built infrastructure, why it succeeds where other things haven't. And he talks about exploring the desert. And he says the incumbents don't even need to explore because they already have their source of water. And the startups rush out into the desert, but the minute they find an oasis, they stop exploring the rest of the desert. But over time, lots of individuals, community, if you like, will ultimately end up mapping the whole desert. And so I think that's part of what's happening in the community energy landscape at the moment, is we've got a lot of groups out there experimenting with a lot of ideas as to how to solve the problems. And importantly, a lot of what they're trying to solve is very local and very relevant to them, which I think is an interesting way to think about change. Often we point to the top of the tree, you know, it's got to be the Prime Minister that changes everything. But to think of change coming from the grassroots up is quite, well, it's quite exciting for me anyway. So let's get into it. Bulk buy models were one of the first communities getting together, doing something together that we saw, especially in South Australia. South Australia was the first state to have a feed-in tariff. And we saw whole streets of people talking to their neighbours, saying, why don't we just get one solar supplier to do the whole street, and transforming the landscape locally that way. Now, it's such a good model that we've actually seen local government get involved, and the Darebin and Adelaide City Council have both provided models where you can buy your solar system and pay it off over time through your rates, which is quite an attractive model. We've also seen commercial models. So Shine Hub are a bit like a Tupperware party model, where they go to community groups. In South Australia, they went to the Conservation Council here and Trees for Life, and they encourage those groups to sell the bulk buy through their own members. So we've seen a few models emerge that are beyond community energy models, but they're still very popular in the community energy sector. We've got one in the inner west of Sydney that's quite active, doing bulk buys there, and another one down in Sunderland Shire. One of the reasons they're successful is that it's a great way for people to get together and talk about the personal decisions they're going to make. It's really important that people have technical support when they spend $10,000 on their home. You know, Shine Hub are including batteries in their discussion too. So it's a really interesting area that I think will definitely persist. We also saw a model in Port Pirie here where they collaborated with Centrelink to allow people to pay off these systems through their Centrelink payments. Where will it go next? Obviously, in new developments, there's great opportunity to spread solar throughout the community. Apartments are one of the challenges, and we've got a project running on solar gardens where we look at what can we do for people who can't put solar on their own roof but could maybe own solar nearby. And the solar gardens model's quite effective in America, where it's simply up to the local electricity supplier, who's usually the council, to say, yes, we will accommodate this. And then rental properties definitely is in energy transition world. A lot of social advocates are talking about the haves and the have-nots when it comes to solar energy, and whose bills have gone down and whose electricity bills have gone up. And renters and low-income folk are definitely missing out on the energy transition. And a lot of the community energy sector is totally committed to an energy transition that brings everyone with us. So that's quite important. Donation models have been really quite successful. So I'm going to run through these three models here. As Jim said, I work with CORENA, and we started very small 5 years ago, took ages to raise our first $10,000. We now have about $250,000 in our revolving fund. We're doing some of the biggest projects we've ever done. We've just launched one to loan $70,000 to Robert Menzies College, and we loan them the money. We do technical work to make sure that they can, these community organisations, it's an interest-free loan. These community organisations will see savings that are bigger than the repayment they need to make us. So the technical support we provide is quite important as well. And we've encouraged other groups to adopt our model. So Quorum in Mullumbimby in New South Wales has adopted our model, simplified it in their own way, made it much more local, and they have done 10 projects already. You know, CORENA's, after 5 years, is up to almost 30 projects. And Bendigo Sustainability Group have a slightly different model. They continue to own and operate the solar panels, and they rely a lot on business donations. So they heavily promote the local business who made this good project happen. But all of these look at how the community benefits, so that, you know, these are models that are driven into the market because we chase the space that businesses can't be bothered chasing. There's not enough profit in it. Whereas when you do it with volunteering, you can generate, it comes back to my triangle about what should government, markets and community provide. You know, community can provide things where government and markets struggle to make it cost effective or valuable in that way. And of course, we see some investment models as well, which come head to head with other people who invest in solar energy, but often provide much more patient capital than the market will. So Clear Sky has been very successful. They run their investments in blocks of 20 investors, which allows them to slip under a trust model, and they're not constrained by a lot of the financial regulation. Pingala has done a co-op model, so that's another way to create multiple investors and make sure it's fair, I guess, is the way that co-ops are set up, with that very strong governance to ensure how profits are allocated and what new profits get or new returns get reinvested into. And on the back of the ACT's 100% renewable energy target, they wrote into their auctioning rules that they wanted to see community benefits. So I've got Sapphire Wind Farm on my slide here, because they went through a substantial community process to understand what would the community be prepared to do if they co-invested in a local wind farm, and how would they like to see the benefits spread around the community. Would they just like profits for investors, or would they like something deeper? Because one of the classic models across most other countries, and you'll see it in a small way in Australia, although our land is very cheap, is any renewable energy project that's built in a community often spits out a community fund of some description that the community then spends on itself. But often there's a bit of a disconnect between what benefit is generated by that community fund and energy. And it's a real opportunity for that community fund to do more good energy work in terms of transforming the energy system. So the community energy sector is quite agnostic about profit-forming companies, not-for-profits and cooperatives. They lean towards cooperatives and not-for-profits, because the stronger you go towards a purely commercial model, how can you even say you're a community energy? But we get a lot of social enterprises that are built on a commercial legal model. So it's mostly the goodwill of the social enterprise that determines the benefit they generate. And finally, I've lumped a lot of the others under this sort of broader system of community-led change. And Enova is the story I love telling, because they came to the first Community Energy Congress in 2014 and went home thinking they were going to build a big solar power plant in northern New South Wales. But when they got there, everyone said to them, we can build the solar plant, but we need a friendly electricity company to deal with. So Enova is Australia's first community-owned retailer, which I think is very exciting. It's not something, it's much harder than building a solar power plant. But they took a deep breath and they did the hard work to make that work. And they're slowly expanding through New South Wales. Moreland Energy Foundation has been around for a long time. They've just rebranded to the Australian Energy Foundation. They were built on the back of the Brunswick Electric Company's forced privatisation by the Victorian Government. So 20 years ago, that money was put into trust and it became the Moreland Energy Foundation. And so for 20 years, most of their bread and butter has been providing energy efficiency services into communities. And we mustn't forget about this. You know, solar is nice and flashy and sparkly, but energy efficiency, despite its boringness, generates a lot more benefit for communities. Try Totally Renewable Yakandanda is a lovely story about a community facing the loss of its petrol station and being faced with the idea that they would have to drive 40 kilometres just to get petrol. So they bought out their petrol station, and from that core group of owners of the petrol station, community-owned petrol station, they've actually started a conversation in their town about going to total renewables. They've been very successful in attracting partnerships with their local electricity network. They're running a few microgrid trials. They've done a lot of work with all the big players in town, and CORENA actually lent the hospital some money to do a big energy efficiency project there. So it's been a really interesting, from community up, story of transition and action planning. And speaking of action planning, the Zero Net Towns, Energy Towns process, and various others, some run by Beyond Zero Emissions. Zero Net Energy came from Moreland Energy Foundation as one of the partners. That sort of start with planning, start with deep conversations in the community about how to transform, how to tackle climate, how to tackle energy, has been a really interesting process to watch. Uralla in New South Wales was the first to go through it. They have a very strong energy efficiency group in Uralla that go around to people and community groups and do a lot of work with them on their energy. And they're starting to do their planning around local power stations as well. Hepburn Springs, which has had one of Australia's first community energy projects, which was 2 wind turbines, community owned outside of Hepburn Springs. They are now going through their very deep process with their town about what a transition to zero carbon looks like. So if I go to my final slide there, that's a quick run round. Obviously, there are 70 projects in Australia, and I could have talked for a lot longer, and it's changing all the time. There are really interesting things happening. So I guess I've put this slide up because it brings together my 2 themes about change. We're at the messy part in the middle. We can't quite see the future, but there's clear signs that the powers that be envisage it as quite centralised. The AEMO and their integrated system plan carves out huge swathes of Australian deserts and says we could put lots of renewables here, and we could build transmission lines, and we could bring that energy back into the cities. The other conversation that's alive and well in that, within the energy regime, if you want to use that language, is that they're doing a lot of work on open energy networks, as is the UK. In the UK, they are totally petrified that when everyone has electric vehicles, they will blow up their transformers. So the networks themselves know that they've got a lot of solar out on the grid. They know nothing about when it operates, how it operates, what it does to the voltages. They know very little about how people's own household energy is changing. And if you put in a battery, you can change your household energy completely in terms of what profile you present to the grid. But also individuals are looking at smart meters and smart devices in their smart homes. So there's a lot going on there. So there's a very strong narrative that fits with the capitalist conversation where we treat every customer as an individual consumer. And so the open energy networks is one of those conversations. And somewhere in the middle between centralised and individual is this community energy model that unlocks collective good. You know, it's not about solving the world from Murray Bridge. It's about doing something at Murray Bridge that suits Murray Bridge itself and generating a lot of collective benefit for that town with what they've got, with the network that they've got and the local resources and assets that they've got. So I'm very excited. It's an interesting time, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a sense of community energy and what it is. We can't hear you, Jim. There we go.
Yeah, sorry, I just unmuted. Thanks, Heather. That was a wonderful tour of community energy, and I'm sure people have got a lot of questions. I've got one, but I'll let someone else go first. Anyone want to jump in with a question? Okay, well look, my question, Heather, is you talked about this being very much of a bottom-up process, but I'm imagining there's something that government can help from top down, particularly in the area of perhaps red tape reduction, but also grants. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I'm trying, sorry, I'm just distracted trying to get myself back, but I don't think I can. I'll stay here talking over my slide. Look, it's definitely a mistake to think of anything as top down or bottom up. I guess I talked to the community market government nexus there, because I think markets and governments have felt themselves so powerful they don't even need to think about community, what community delivers. And in fact, there's a ton that they can do. There's just been an inquiry in Victoria around community sustainability and community transition. So we've been heavily involved in that. And because that Victorian government, or, you know, the bureaucrats at least, have been on the long process with Hepburn Wind, especially, started before 2010, started fundraising for that. Maybe the conversation about community energy has reached deeper into their psyche than it has in some of the other states. And so, you know, a lot of the New South Wales action is because the New South Wales government realised $50,000 grants to communities were actually quite popular. And so they did that a couple of times around the community energy theme. I think the Victorian stuff will go harder on some of the things we need. So in the electricity system, there's a massive perverse price around postage stamp pricing. So it says that solar on the edge of the grid is going to cost you as much as solar from your next door neighbour. We're going to charge you the same amount, same grid charge for transporting that solar to you. But of course, for the network itself, that's not the case. Giving you your neighbour's solar is much, much cheaper. And so it looks like the Victorian government might try to tackle some of that with some incentives or feed-in tariffs that are about locally scaled stuff. Because of course, you know that in the middle of the day, we're starting to get a solar glut where everything is too much. We've got too much solar and we're not using it all. Well, the reality is we are using our neighbour's solar and we are not using solar from the edge of the grid. So if it's a competition as to whose renewable energy gets used, the local energy story makes a lot more sense there. We've lobbied local councils. I know in South Australia, we put up a big, did 6 months of work here and put up a long list of things local government could do. And part of this is about building new institutions, in a sense. You know, a lot of what I saw overseas was when the renewable energy opportunity came live, there was already an institution there who pivoted from the work they were doing in energy efficiency to the new work, which is how do we bring on renewables in our community? And those sorts of institutions are often NGOs, they're often sort of partnered with government, or they're built into local government. They don't exist in Australia. Australia's had no real you can go back 100 years and find local government owning systems, but it's had this state-based thinking, and it's a very urbanised country compared to a lot of the places I've visited as well. So yeah, there's lots local government can do. In South Australia, they've gone off the boil because they're under a lot of pressure to do less, not more, over here. So there's been some really big federal campaigns. Labor has accepted the federal position twice now, and Labor have not got in twice now. So that is around building, they call them community power hubs, but they sell them like land care for energy. So this idea that lots of local groups are supported through an overarching program or whatever, in the same way that land care has brought all parts of the community together and volunteering and done real stuff in their community. That's the sort of model that they were trying to push in to be recognised by federal government. Does that answer your question?
Sure, yep. Anyone else with questions?
I'm not sure if anyone can hear me.
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Lovely, because my video is not working, so you can obviously be much happier not looking at me, so that's good. South Australia, late in the Weatherall government, there was a coalition of councils all down the Fleurieu, which were looking at their own particular energy hub. You had Hills, Mount Barker, Alexandrina, Victor Harbour, Kangaroo Island, Yankalilla, all in one big, coalition looking at a community way of reducing energy costs for everyone. Under the new Marshall Plan, that thing has been put to one side. But Victor Harbour Council at the moment, I have a couple of councillors who are very keen on renewables. Even the mayor is an ex-Greens candidate for state parliament, which in a retirees, grumpy old men speaking, capital of South Australia, and basically staunch liberals, that's certainly some sort of achievement. And one of the grumpy old Liberal councillors is gung-ho on renewables. I have to rein him in sometimes and say, look, that is not going to work. That's financially or technically not viable. So, put it to one side. But on the council thing, okay, under the Constitution, councils don't exist, so they have to be state-based. But what can we do with councils to encourage them? I know you mentioned Hepburn Springs and Yakandanda. I'm not sure what electorate Hepburn's in, but Yakandanda was part of Cathy McGowan as she was gung-ho in supporting that. I'm not sure on the electorate of Hepburn because that's the other side of the Hume Highway. But what actually can we do with councils to encourage them and give them guidance?
So I helped write the report for the 6 councils down in Victor Harbour. I think we've got a brand new bunch of councillors now, and we have to keep talking to them because a lot of them don't know what community energy is and what it could be. We've got a lot of resources from that report that says, here are all the wonderful things you can do. I mean, one of the things that bothers councils most is community resilience against climate change. And most of the reports that come out in our area, the biggest is increased bushfires.
Yep.
And of course, having energy during a bushfire can be really important. So how do you do that? I mean, easy as to make sure every community, every designated community shelter or place that communities are expected to go in times of crisis has enough solar and batteries to operate off the grid, right? You could do it for your schools if it's schools they're sent to, or for your community buildings if it's community buildings. That is the simplest thing that councils could do. But you could do more, obviously. And Victor Harbour is at a bit of risk because it's a big population on the end of a single string. So again, having those conversations with your councillors, helping them understand that they do have a role to play in energy, and there's lots that they could support, I think is the starting point with a lot of these things.
Thank you, Heather. Yep.
Now, Howard had a question and Don's got a question.
No, ignore Howard, he's troublemaker.
Oh.
You go first, Don.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Is there such a thing as a kind of templates that a local community could refer to help them begin the, you know, I just imagine where I live, you know, I think, well, I could go talk to my council about this. They're certainly be receptive to this kind of thing. They have initiatives that on a Venn diagram would stamp over a big part of what you're doing. And so and I got to thinking, I was thinking, well, what would be handy is for concerned citizens such as myself is to have a template of like, well, here's a community. They started with this. They went to this. These were the the 50,000 foot view of the steps they went through. And then you can drill down to each one of them, referring to an actual community that solved an actual problem and did an actual thing. And then you can take that to your conversation. The template would presumably say, you know, the kind of people you want to talk to in the council will be in the planning department, look for people who have this kind of role and so forth. And so that you, I mean, I feel like I would, like everybody I'm sure, has lots of brilliant ideas about how we might do things. You know, I thought of like going down my street and doing a survey of how many people have got panels, and then doing a feedback into the people on our street and saying if we got more and blah, blah, blah. But it's a bit of inventing the wheel stuff. And I think, yeah, you could do that, and maybe you would be the first one to do it. It would be worth doing. But the chances are somebody like yourself might know of resources that we could look at for, as I say, a template, a recipe.
So I get to do a plug now. Our Community Energy Congress is coming up in August or September this year. So this will be the third one. We held one in 2017, and we definitely made the how do we get started the theme of 2017. So there's a huge series of resources that came out of that where, you know, we categorized everything, we showed where the real examples are, and a number of reports and webinars have been written, done as well around what communities have actually done, how they've done it, what the legal models are, those sorts of things, what your main choices are. So that framework that I've used today, bulk buys, investments, donations, that is, it comes from that sort of 2017 work where we went, these are the main models that are emerging. This is the first decision you need to make in your community about what you want to do. And now this will guide you to resources. So I'm happy, if it's useful, Jim, to send you a bunch of links about where the resources are. And I mean, we're a volunteer organisation, right? We're building a knowledge hub. That's code for I'm building a knowledge hub. And I'm building it like a sort of wiki, because this is a moving feast, and actually you don't want to come through me to find Peter to talk to Peter directly to find out how to do this thing, right? So its intention is to allow all the groups to share the resources they have. You know, everyone who wants to do a revolving fund, if they're in the community energy sector, they know to come to CORENA, and CORENA will hand over our legals and say, you know, this is what we've learnt, and that sort of thing. So I think we're trying, absolutely, to make it straightforward. But if I go also back to that messy idea, we're at a stage where running down to the 2 or 3 successful models is still not enough, right? Those 2 or 3 successful models only work today in today's commercial environment. The Victorian Government might bring in their feed-in tariff. We'll see a swathe more models that work in that environment. So I think it's going to keep going. This messiness is going to keep going for quite a while as we, you know, tangle with the system and force it to change.
That raises all kinds of other questions there. And again, I think as I've gotten on in life, I try to keep reminding myself, don't, you know, like I said earlier, don't keep reinventing the wheel. Other people have done this, find out how they did that. No, it won't be an exact fit to what you want to do, but often it's a good starting point. You can work from it. I don't know if you mentioned it, but as a way of contending with having related informational resources, I find wikis, which you can set up, are a good way to go. They're very intuitive to set up, and they are a good way to interlink stuff. They're highly dynamic. They don't require any expenditure as part of your responsible time. Thing I was going to, if I may, just one point, then I'll yield the floor. And that is the whole process you're talking about, this messy process we're going through. I'm presuming there are historians of civic development and so forth who can talk about how that works, so that negotiating, you can say, oh, this is how ideas coalesce, crystallize, and then become the thing. And it's good to know that kind of stuff as you are looking at where we want to take all this stuff and say, where are we going to go? Other people have been down that path. Whether it was for, I don't know, you know, getting a new sewage system in or water or whatever. Okay.
And the bit that I quote is the guy who behind that framework with the regime and stuff like that. In 2017, he published academic work that says we need to do more work on whole systems. We've been looking too much at individual technologies. So we can tell you the story of how solar took over, but we can't tell you the story how we actually shake this damn whole system and force it to change. And you know, maybe it's beyond repair. Maybe we will never get off the centralized system. But the fact that the system is panicking about what individuals might do and having their conversation about open energy networks means we could go through quite a difficult, crunchy bit where actually some of the centralised stuff has to let go of its power, and local microgrids are built and governed locally because they make sense. And after the Californian bushfires, there's a ton of stuff on my Twitter feed about microgrids. I'm starting to talk about that. But
can I just, I think we're running out of time here, but I just noticed, Howard, do you want to ask a really quick question? Sorry, Don, but Howard was been waiting for a while. But we really need to make it quick now because people do need to go to their regular meetings as well. So thanks.
Okay, it's just a quick question about technology. So with our open systems and our microgrids, with infrastructure, what are the main holdups? Is it smart metering and control? Is that the main thing that's stopping this kicking in terms of technology?
Everyone says the technology and innovation focused frameworks have forgotten to talk about political power and narrative and how change really manifests in the world and who lets it manifest. So my PhD, I mean, you've put your finger bang on where my PhD is trying to be. Is it the technology needs to still come up to speed, in which case we need to incentivize some of it, and these big perverse price signals don't help. But actually, if I can model a microgrid that is much better than the transformer investment you want to make, Mr. Power Systems Engineer, what is it between my knowledge and your knowledge that has to change for you to allow these new ideas? And so I think that a lot could be done to make systems cheaper if we looked inside people's homes and were smarter about how we use, we don't need to spend $1 a kilowatt hour on storage when we could spend 10 cents on using our hot water storage system. And I've got my numbers wrong there, but it's that sort of differential. We've got a lot of cheap things households could do to make the system work better. The system definitely needs to change. It was dumb. It just provided what the grid wanted because you could dispatch energy whenever you liked. We're in a new world where Australia, of all the countries in the world, has the most variable renewable energy. So we're the ones that are going to invent how do we make our load match our supply, because we can't control the supply. The wind blows when it likes and the sun shines when it likes. So that's a really at the crux of things where there's lots of household technology could fix that. All this fancy, grid forming inverters and how the big Jamestown battery works and things like that, on its own is transforming the system because they were given an opportunity to put it in there and have a go. And they've proven themselves very well, possibly quite expensive too.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have to call it short there. It's been a really exciting topic, and I think we're all on a fast learning curve with this, and I think it's something that we need to think about how we can get governments to support, because CCL is very much about having conversations about getting better policy. And I've still got my thinking cap on about that. I'm still taking things in at this stage. So thanks very much, Heather, for that fascinating talk, and thanks for the good questions.
If I could just say one thing about that, these projects, community projects, are visible, practical, touchable things. So I think we could be a really good companion to CCL, because you're talking about things you can do now and price signals you can create for the future, and maybe that works for people be seen to be doing stuff.
Yeah, great segue.